since Bernie Sanders announced that he's running for president again, there's been a lot of really bad takes from the mainstream media, such as the Washington Post calling him a one-hit wonder, or this article from Bloomberg basically laughably saying nobody cares after he just raised $6 million on his very first day. And there's been a lot of pundits in the mainstream media who really aren't too excited about Bernie Sanders. But with that being said, my favorite bad take from the media, of course, came from Fox News, which is just a bad take machine. And they covered Bernie Sanders in the way that we'd expect them to cover Bernie Sanders, by fear-mongering about socialism, and their argument essentially was...
They're going to be the left of Venezuela.
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 And I'm not exaggerating, this isn't just a meme, this is basically what Greg Gutfeld said when he was talking about the launch of Bernie Sanders' campaign.
I'm very excited. Before I get into his chances, having a socialist call a capitalist dangerous is rich. The socialist who fails to see that his platform only ends in misery. Socialism is great at promising something, but has no idea how to fulfill the promise, which is why it always ends up in coercion, misery, and ultimately death. There's, you can look at Venezuela, Cuba, Cambodia, East Germany, Ethiopia, Romania, Poland, USSR. The only sad thing is, all of socialism is ugly and disgusting, but Bernie is likable. He's like your crazy uncle who maybe washes his hair once a week, doesn't think it's valuable to wash more.
Ha! Got him!
So there were so many gems in that really quick segment, and by gems, I mean mind-numbingly stupid statements by Greg Gutfeld. And, you know, we're not just going to dwell on the stupidity here, because this is all what we'd expect from Fox News, because the response from another panelist is what I really want to focus on. But let's just take a moment to go over what Greg Gutfeld says here. Quote, his platform only ends in misery. He also says socialism ends up in coercion, misery, and ultimately death. I mean, if you're going to do propaganda, you maybe don't want to be that hyperbolic so it's actually believable, but nonetheless, you know, suit yourself. His evidence here for that, by the way, is Venezuela, Cuba, Cambodia, and other countries who all tried socialism and have failed. But in actuality, Bernie Sanders isn't trying to replicate those models of socialism. He's a very moderate social democrat who's modeling his policies after the likes of Scandinavian countries, where social democracy is incredibly successful. Denmark, Norway, Sweden, those countries. And furthermore, if you're going to fearmonger about someone like Bernie Sanders, then you also have to explain how there's basically a social democratic party in every single European country, and that's because social democracy is something that isn't even controversial. It's only controversial in the United States, where we have a right-wing Overton window. But nonetheless, I mean, Greg Gutfeld, he's not going to try to explain this from a position of someone who wants to educate his audience, because he is a bad faith actor. And then he says, even though socialism is bad, Bernie is likable. And the implication is that because Bernie is likable, and since we're so enamored with Bernie Sanders, we can't see the danger that he actually poses in actuality. But no, that's not it. It's not that we're enamored with Bernie Sanders because of his likability. We're enamored with the policies he's talking about. Because when Bernie Sanders says, hey, our neighbors north of the border have Medicare for all, so why can't we have it? That makes sense. When he says maybe it's the case that, you know, four-year colleges are now equal to what high school diplomas were a couple of decades ago, and maybe we should make college free, that makes sense. So it's the policies that we're enamored with, not his likability and charisma, because Bernie Sanders, as Kyle Kalinske puts it, he has anti-charisma. You see him for what it is. He's just an old man who wants to give us healthcare and education, and that's it. But I want to get to the real point and why I'm even talking about this, because, you know, if you're on Fox News, the goal ultimately is to do propaganda at the behest of the Republican Party. But Juan Williams comes in and he completely drops a bomb on this segment, and it goes off the rails for all the right reasons, because he actually comes to Bernie Sanders' defense and basically tells you all the things that I just told you about.
I think that the question is, does he register as a Democrat? It's an interesting one for me, because I think for him it would be an identity shift.
Yep.
I mean, he's always been the Vermont socialist. And I think it's added to part of his allure in that he's willing to go there and not respond to the taunts from the far right about socialism. And by the way...
Or just normal people.
No, I don't think normal
people know socialism. It's not a taunt. It's a reality that's ended in death.
No, I don't think you want to say that there are no normal people in Denmark, Norway, England, Germany, France. There are lots of people there. And I don't think you want to say it's not normal people in the United States who back Social Security, Medicare, VA, or
that's socialism.
All subsidies,
that's socialism.
All the government making decisions about how to help people get through this life.
It's in a decentralized system. It's
yes,
different.
That's right. So guess what? You want to label all these programs socialist, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're for people in our country, Greg, who are struggling with their finances.
I am for a safety net. I'm not for socialism.
Speaking of social security.
But there's a difference at a time when we have rampant income inequality in this country.
What does that mean?
I'll tell you what it means. I'll tell you exactly what it means. It means, Lawrence, when you think about it, it's something like 0.6% of Americans right now, the top 1%, have more wealth than the bottom 60%.
But they're there for 1 year.
But you painted it as
They're there for 1 year.
Let Katie have the floor.
Before we get to a break, can I say something? First of all, Juan, you're wrong.
Whoa, Juan. Let's just stop. Okay, be quiet. Let Katie talk because you're making too much sense. And if you'll recall, this is Fox News, and we're doing an anti-Bernie propaganda segment. So, Katie, please explain why Juan is wrong here. I mean, the minute he really starts hammering them, he gets cut off. And this is what you'd expect from Fox News. It's not the first time that it happened because the host there was supposed to rein him in, and she was doing just that. And what's interesting is he actually set off this entire discussion by using a particular trigger word, the far right, because he brought up Bernie Sanders and talked about how Bernie Sanders never feeds into the far right narrative about socialism. And that was a trigger to Greg Gutfeld, who said, well, look, it's not the far right who are against socialism, it's just people who are normal, which is when Juan Williams proceeded to dismantle Greg Gutfeld's bullshit argument, saying, I don't think you want to say that there are no normal people in Denmark, Norway, England, Germany, France, and I don't think you want to say there's no normal people in the United States who back Social Security, Medicare, the VA. And that right there is exactly how you want to respond when somebody starts being disingenuous and alarmist and starts fear-mongering about socialism. Ask them if they like the socialist Social Security that is keeping their grandmother from sliding into homelessness and poverty. Ask them if they like the socialist paved roads that they drive on. Ask them if they like the socialist fire department. I mean, it's ridiculous. And Greg Gutfeld tried to give himself cover by saying, no, I support a safety net, but I just don't support Bernie Sanders' brand of socialism. What is his brand of socialism? Social democracy. Basically saying we look out for the people and we have a more mixed economy where we remove the profit incentive from industries that actually can harm us, like healthcare. Like, there shouldn't be a profit motive in healthcare. The goal should just be the delivery of healthcare. And if you disagree with that, then you're the radical, Greg. Because 70% of the American people now, including 52% of the base of the party that you do propaganda for, agrees with us, not you. Now, what's interesting is that Katie went on to correct the record in this next clip here after she stopped Juan Williams. And since Juan Williams did so much damage to the argument that Greg Gutfeld was pushing, she had to really basically undo the damage. So she ramped up the fear-mongering to a 10, and she said just the most ridiculous things I've seen with regard to this talk of socialism. Because it's no longer just that Bernie Sanders wants to, inadvertently turn us into Venezuela. No, he likes Venezuela. That's actually what she said. Take a look.
There are more millionaires and billionaires now than there ever have been, but the middle class and the medium income has gone up, and the gap has actually closed between the rich and the poor. Back to Bernie Sanders.
Okay, go ahead.
He's an authentic guy.
Talk about covering over reality. The reality is that right now, I just did this last week in a column.
Okay,
and it said 7 million people right now in our country, 3 months behind on car payments. 40% of the country can't afford an emergency $400 expenditure.
There are 6 million jobs that are unfilled right now in America. There are 6 million jobs that are unfilled right now in America. AOC just ran Amazon out of New York, which was going to pay people $150,000 a year. But back to Bernie Sanders. He's an authentic guy selling a fraud. It's a shame he doesn't wash his hair that often because he has lots of bathrooms in 3 different homes to wash his hair, right? This is a guy who is claiming that the government can take care of you, who back in his early days of his socialist screed said that bread lines were a representation of a good government functioning, people actually standing in line and waiting for bread in places like Nicaragua and South America. He wants that kind of socialism. So when you bring up European-style socialism, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Bernie Sanders, who has embraced Venezuela, embraced Cuba, and has said the definition of a good economy is when people are standing in line begging the government because they were starving for some bread or some soup, whatever's left over.
No, what he's saying is a government that responds to human need is a good government.
Okay,
you know what
a government that allows people to get what they want and need on their own is a better government.
No, I'm all for it. But when you are in a situation like we're in America today, when you have heightened income inequality,
what has the New Deal done for American poverty in this country?
And by the way, Lawrence is on to something. Don't ignore what he said about Bernie being the exact opposite of Donald Trump. The populist energy in the country.
I'm going to ask Greg.
I just love that she interjected and interrupted Juan to try to disprove income inequality. You can't gaslight people about that because we see firsthand how the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting more poor, which is why when you look at public opinion polls, people actually think that the wealthy should pay their fair share. So you're not going to convince us that something that's a fact is not actually happening. We see it firsthand. So what are you even talking about, Katie? She then went on to the other usual list of attacks that they have against Bernie Sanders. Oh, he has 3 houses. Never heard that one before. And for the record, they have 2 houses, but the third one was inherited by Jane, and then one of them was sold. I mean, if you're a member of Congress, you're going to have multiple houses. You make a lot of money as a member of Congress. What do they make, like $180,000 a year or something like that? That's a shit ton of money. So if you are working in D.C., but you live somewhere else, then odds are you're going to have different houses. She then tried to pretend as if Bernie Sanders wasn't in favor of Scandinavian socialism, and she tried to basically correct Juan by saying, no, you're saying that he wants to make the United States more like Scandinavia, but he actually does want to make it like Venezuela. And I need to read the quote because it's so stupid. So she said, quote, that Bernie said that bread lines were a representation of good government functioning. People are actually standing in line and waiting for bread in places like Nicaragua and South America. He wants that kind of socialism. So when you bring up European-style socialism, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Bernie Sanders, who has embraced Venezuela, embraced Cuba, and has said the definition of a good economy is when people are standing in line begging the government because they are starving for some bread or soup or whatever's left over. They're making my job so easy. She is making my job that easy. Because you have Bernie Sanders, who's the most popular politician in the country, saying, look, I just want you guys to have the same things that other modern industrialized nations have. And what is her response? He's embraced Venezuela and Cuba. To say something that dim-witted, you're either intentionally lying or you're just horribly misinformed. And we all know it's probably the former. But thankfully, again, Juan Williams corrected her. And he said, look, Bernie Sanders is claiming that a government responds to human need is good government, not that he thinks bread lines and starvation is bad. Who actually would believe that Bernie Sanders thinks that bread lines is the goal for America? Do you honestly believe that? Of course you don't. You're a smug, disingenuous liar. And by interrupting Juan, you're just proving us right because you don't want the correct message to get out, which is why you had to interject with your own bullshit and propaganda. And one last point that he made that I want to touch on here is he says that if we're in a time when there's this much income and wealth inequality, then we need another New Deal type of response to address that. We need to actually respond to the needs of the people. But they cut him off again, of course. Because whenever you start making too much sense on Fox News, they cut you off. Because, again, the goal here is to attack Bernie and do propaganda at the behest of the Republican Party. And propping up Bernie and telling the truth about Bernie, that's not going to behoove Fox News and their advertisers who also donate to the Republican Party. So, of course, they have a vested interest in shutting Juan Williams up. Now, one last clip I'm going to leave you with here is something that Greg Gutfeld said that is comical, and it shows how out of touch he is.
The best thing that could happen for Trump is for Bernie Sanders to get the nomination, to put an actual bona fide socialist up against a capitalist in a country that created the greatest economic system known to man. What an education it'll be for people in college and high school to learn about what socialism has done in all of these countries. And he's not running just against Trump. He's running against Venezuela. Right. Because while he's out there, Venezuela will be crumbling. God knows what it'll be like in 2020, whether it'll be there or not. So we want Bernie to be up there, and maybe he can choose another socialist or
double socialist.
AOC.
Socialist square.
The AOC's still too young.
You don't want that, Greg. Trust me, you don't want that. Because this is not going to be an election about the isms. It's going to be an election about the issues. And if the right somehow tries to make this about socialism, then the left is going to make this about fascism, because Donald Trump is a president that has a plethora of fascistic tendencies. He was locking children in cages. You don't think we're going to bring that up and warn the American people about the dangers of fascism? So you wouldn't be served well to make this about socialism. Look, this isn't the 1990s anymore. The same old tricks that would have worked then, they're not going to work in 2020. I can assure you of that. And when you look at polls from 2016, all hypothetical matchups showed that Bernie Sanders would have whooped Trump's ass. Now, we're in a different time, but all of that momentum and enthusiasm behind Bernie has not gone away. So I want them to want Bernie to be the nominee, because that means they're going to ignore him because they don't view him as a threat. I want them to underestimate Bernie Sanders, but something tells me they don't. Something tells me that they saw those $6 million in donations Bernie Sanders managed to raise within the first 24 hours, and they got afraid, which is why they're even doing this segment. Because if you're truly not afraid of someone, you just ignore them. So, yeah, this was a great segment. It went off the rails, and Juan Williams, he did a good job here. You know, I'm not too familiar with the rest of his work, but to defend Bernie in a factual way was surprisingly a refreshing thing to see from a Fox News outlet that's just based on doing propaganda for the Republican Party.
Subscribe if you like this video, folks. Mike's tremendous, and he's doing a really, really good job. Many people are telling me about how wonderful the Humanist Report is. Bigly.